The US-Iran situation continues to escalate, with regional tensions reaching a fever pitch. The United States has repeatedly adopted a hardline stance toward Iran, triggering volatility in the international energy market and placing the shipping security of the Strait of Hormuz under global scrutiny. More importantly, Russia has explicitly articulated its position in support of Iran. This geopolitical interplay has long transcended the bilateral scope, exerting a profound impact on the global geopolitical landscape. Today, we will delve into the core logic and potential risks underlying this complex standoff. Recently, the United States has strategically targeted Iran's diplomatic and economic lifelines through trade coercion tactics. Owing to long-standing sanctions impeding US-Iran relations, bilateral commercial exchanges remain constrained. Consequently, the relevant pressure measures are primarily directed at Iran's trading partners. The core objective of the US strategy is clear: to leverage global trade pressure to coerce other nations into reassessing the risks of cooperating with Iran, thereby achieving the isolation of Iran. In the wake of this development, the global trade community has responded robustly. Numerous countries that initially intended to engage in energy and infrastructure cooperation with Iran have suspended relevant negotiations to mitigate potential risks and avoid excessive costs. Notably, the United States maintains a persistent hardline diplomatic posture toward Iran, resulting in a stalemate in bilateral negotiations. The international community's anticipated window for de-escalation has closed, and there is a broad consensus among external observers that US policy toward Iran has undergone a comprehensive shift toward toughness. This diplomatic escalation has further heightened the uncertainty permeating the regional landscape. Another notable development is that US President Trump's remarks on Iran's domestic situation have been widely interpreted by the international community as a signal of intent to intervene in Iran's internal affairs. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi explicitly stated at a January 12 press conference that Trump's comments on the Iranian situation constitute an act of interference in Iran's internal affairs, noting that domestic protests in Iran have escalated into violence and bloodshed, providing a pretext for Trump's intervention. However, as of January 15, no authoritative confirmation has emerged regarding reports that the U.S. State Department issued an evacuation advisory for U.S. citizens in Iran, and prior speculation about an imminent military operation lacks substantive factual basis. Overall, through a series of measures including trade coercion and tough diplomatic rhetoric, the United States has continuously escalated tensions in US-Iran relations. In turn, the geopolitical dynamics across the broader Middle East region have become significantly strained, prompting regional states to generally enhance their vigilance and defensive postures. In response to US pressure, Iran has moved swiftly to publicly denounce US unilateral actions as violations of international law and disruptions to the international order. An Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson emphasized at a press conference that US threats constitute blatant, hegemonic behavior, affirming that Iran will not be intimidated and will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national sovereignty and interests. Hardline stance has indeed exacerbated Iran's diplomatic predicament. Several European nations, including France, have initiated the evacuation of non-essential personnel from their embassies in Iran. This move not only constitutes a direct response to the deteriorating regional security environment but also serves to amplify Iran's sense of diplomatic isolation on the international stage. Furthermore, the deterioration of US-Iran relations has triggered a chain reaction across the region. With Gulf cooperation, Council states such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates enhancing their military deployments amid concerns over potential spillover effects, thereby severely undermining peace and stability in the Middle East. Next, we turn our focus to a critical geopolitical choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Amid escalating US-Iran tensions, this vital energy thoroughfare through which approximately 20% of global oil supplies are transported has become a focal point of global concern regarding shipping security. with emerging signs of volatility in both the international energy and shipping markets. According to data from the International Energy Agency IEA's 2024 annual report, the daily crude oil throughput of the Strait reached 20 million barrels in 2024. The vast majority of crude oil exports from major Gulf oil-producing nations, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran, are routed through this strait to key consumer markets in Asia. Consequently, the navigational security of the Strait of Hormuz is inherently linked to the stability of global energy supplies, and any disruption could potentially trigger significant market fluctuations. Against this backdrop, as the risk of US-Iran conflict intensifies, the navigational security of the Strait of Hormuz has garnered heightened attention, prompting oil tanker operators to implement a range of risk mitigation measures. Open-source maritime tracking data indicates that recent transits through the strait have witnessed significant adjustments to navigation strategies. Vessels are not only navigating closer to the centerline of international shipping lanes but also increasing their speed substantially. Additionally, numerous tankers originally scheduled for mid-voyage refueling and resupply have opted to forego such stops and transit at full speed, with the primary objective of minimizing exposure to potential navigational risks associated with a further deterioration of the situation. These concerns are not unfounded. In the event of a direct US-Iran conflict, Iran is highly likely to deploy the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz as a critical retaliatory measure. More importantly, there are no viable short-term alternatives to this shipping route. Currently, only Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates operate oil pipelines that can bypass the Strait of Hormuz, but the throughput capacity of these pipelines is limited and insufficient to accommodate large-scale crude oil transportation demands. While Iran also possesses some bypass pipeline infrastructure, its operational utilization rate has remained persistently low. This irreplaceability underscores the potential for any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz to trigger a severe backlash in the global energy market. Driven by heightened shipping risks, international oil prices have exhibited a sustained upward trajectory in recent weeks. Since the outset of 2026, global oil prices have tended upward overall, with volatility approaching the break-even threshold for most. U.S. shale oil produces a development that carries significant implications for global crude oil supply dynamics. Industry analysts project that a further escalation of the US-Iran conflict could lead to continued oil price hikes, while a complete blockade of the Strait of Hormuz might trigger a sharp surge in oil prices, potentially plunging the global energy market into severe turmoil. Beyond the energy sector, the shipping industry is also confronting mounting volatility expectations. In recent weeks, amid escalating US-Iran tensions, shipping companies operating on Middle East routes have significantly increased risk premiums, with corresponding rises in maritime insurance costs. To preempt potential disruptions and control operational costs, numerous freight forwarders have initiated adjustments to their shipping itineraries, actively avoiding Middle Eastern routes where possible, a trend that has precipitated localized disruptions in the global shipping network. It is crucial to note that the Strait of Hormuz serves not only as a crude oil conduit but also as a primary transportation route for Qatar's liquefied natural gas (LNG) exports. The risk of a blockade could therefore propagate across energy markets, triggering volatility in the global natural gas sector. Currently, the global supply chain remains inherently fragile, and the confluence of rising freight rates on Middle Eastern routes and surging energy prices has further elevated the production and operational costs for businesses worldwide. In particular, manufacturing enterprises reliant on energy imports from the Middle East are already grappling with significant cost pressures, while some small and medium-sized enterprises face operational distress, posing a severe challenge to the stability of the global supply chain. This raises a critical question. Why does the United States persist in its hardline stance toward Iran? A core rationale lies in the escalating domestic challenges confronting the United States, where external toughness has emerged as a strategic tool to deflect public attention from domestic crises and accumulate political capital. Presently, the United States is beset by a confluence of internal and external challenges, with acute economic and social fissures that demand urgent attention. First, the national debt crisis looms large. U.S. national debt has reached an all-time high, with the U.S. Treasury Department reporting on January 13 that the federal deficit for the first 3 months of the 2026 fiscal year had ballooned to $602 billion. This mounting debt burden continues to exacerbate fiscal pressures, emerging as a significant bottleneck constraining U.S. economic growth. Second, inflationary pressures persist. While inflation has exhibited modest signs of abatement recently, it remains above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. Persistently high prices for core consumer goods including food, energy, and housing have eroded U.S. household purchasing power and contributed to a sustained decline in public satisfaction with living standards. Furthermore, the problem of manufacturing hollowing out has intensified, with the exodus of numerous manufacturing jobs and the decline of traditional industrial heartlands. Farmers and small business owners are grappling with operational hardships, and bankruptcy rates have surged significantly compared to previous years. The accumulation of these economic grievances has inevitably spilled over into social unrest. Recent months have witnessed a proliferation of protests across the United States as public discontent over high inflation, mounting debt, and persistent employment challenges has manifested in large-scale demonstrations, some of which have escalated into localized riots. Beyond social unrest, political polarization in the United States has deepened to unprecedented levels, with partisan strife reaching a fever pitch. Specifically, with only 17 days remaining until the expiration of temporary funding on January 30th. Negotiations between the two major parties on Capitol Hill over a long-term appropriations bill have reached an impasse. Republicans are steadfastly prioritizing border security measures, while Democrats are advocating for expanded social welfare provisions, with neither side willing to compromise. Concurrently, preparations for the 2026 midterm elections have commenced prematurely, intensifying competition for seats in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Partisan rivals have weaponized policy disputes for electoral gain, with even the January 6 Capitol riot serving as a political cudgel in inter-party attacks. Severe political gridlock has hamstrung the U.S. government's ability to formulate and implement effective policies, diverting attention from pressing domestic issues. Against this domestic backdrop, the strategic logic underlying the U.S. hard-line stance toward Iran becomes clear. On one hand, manufacturing external conflicts serves to divert public scrutiny from domestic inadequacies to international confrontations. On the other hand, cultivating a tough on Iran image caters to the preferences of conservative voters, bolstering electoral prospects and accumulating political capital. Beyond domestic political calculations, geopolitical strategy and energy dominance remain central to U.S. objectives. The Middle East occupies a pivotal position in U.S. global strategy, and controlling regional energy resources confers significant leverage in the global economic order. As a major oil-producing nation in the Middle East, Iran's crude oil production averages between 3.3 million and 4.1 million barrels per day, accounting for approximately 3% of global supply, according to public data from the International Energy Agency (IEA). Securing influence over Iran's energy sector not only strengthens U.S. control over global energy corridors but also curtails the expansion of other major powers' influence in the Middle East, thereby entrenching U.S. global hegemony. Confronted with sustained U.S. pressure, Iran finds itself in a precarious predicament, ensnared in a confluence of internal and external challenges. Nevertheless, Iran has maintained an uncompromising hardline stance. Economically, long-term U.S. sanctions have inflicted severe damage on Iran's economy, characterized by rampant inflation, currency depreciation, and a steady erosion of household purchasing power. External coercion has further exacerbated these economic vulnerabilities. As previously noted, U.S. pressure tactics targeting Iran's trading partners have further constricted Iran's export channels, placing significant constraints on its crude oil exports. Simultaneously, Iran's foreign exchange reserves remain depleted due to prolonged sanctions, limiting its capacity to mitigate external economic shocks. Domestically, numerous enterprises are grappling with operational disruptions stemming from restricted access to raw materials and capital shortages. Socially, Iran also faces substantial pressures. Domestic protests have erupted in various regions, with some escalating into violent unrest and casualties, imposing significant strain on government efforts to maintain stability. On January 11th, the Iranian government announced a 3-day national mourning period for the martyrs killed during the unrest and called for demonstrations on January 12 to condemn the violent acts of terrorist elements. On January 12, hundreds of thousands of Iranians took to the streets across the country to denounce foreign-backed riots, demonstrating a show of national unity. These social upheavals are intrinsically linked to economic hardships, with public dissatisfaction over soaring living costs and limited employment opportunities serving as key catalysts. Compounding Iran's challenges is the apparent intent of external forces to meddle in its internal affairs. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has affirmed that Iran possesses substantial evidence implicating the United States and Israel in fomenting terrorist activities within Iran. Diplomatically, Iran faces mounting isolation, as the evacuation of non-essential personnel by several European embassies has heightened international concerns about the country's stability and reinforced its sense of diplomatic marginalization. In the context of the US-Iran conflict, many international organizations and nations have either remained neutral or aligned with the United States, further constricting Iran's diplomatic maneuvering space. Despite these adversities, Iran's retaliatory posture remains resolute, underscoring its unwavering commitment to resisting external pressure. Militarily, the Iranian armed forces issued a statement as early as January 10, affirming that under the command of the supreme leader, they will coordinate with other security forces to closely monitor adversarial activities, resolutely safeguard national sovereignty and interests, protect critical infrastructure and public assets, and urge the Iranian people to unite in defeating the enemy's conspiracies. Iran's defense minister has further warned that any act of aggression against Iranian territory will elicit a proportionately stronger response, ensuring that the aggressor pays a heavy price. Militarily, Iran has maintained a high state of readiness, designating energy facilities and military bases adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz as key defensive assets. Iran possesses significant asymmetric warfare capabilities, including an extensive arsenal of missiles and air defense systems. The firepower range of its ballistic missiles covers U.S. military bases throughout the Middle East and the entire territory of Israel, serving as a critical deterrent against U.S. aggression. Beyond the military sphere, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei delivered a national televised address, calling on the Iranian people to maintain unity in the face of external threats. He harshly criticized certain rioters for colluding with the leader of a foreign nation, an implicit reference to the United States, emphasizing that Iran will not yield to insurrectionists and will not tolerate mercenaries acting on behalf of foreign powers. Khamenei's address has played a pivotal role in consolidating domestic consensus, with numerous citizens responding to calls to participate in pro-government rallies, fostering a strengthened sense of national unity. Additionally, Iran is actively pursuing international solidarity, strengthening cooperation with friendly nations such as Russia, condemning U.S. hegemonic behavior through diplomatic channels, and striving to cultivate a favorable international public opinion environment. The Speaker of the Iranian parliament has explicitly stated that in the event of a U.S. military strike, Israel, along with U.S. overseas military bases and warships, would be legitimate targets for Iranian retaliation. These pronouncements collectively underscore Iran's uncompromising defensive posture. In the context of this U.S.-Iran standoff, Russia's posture has attracted significant international attention. Historically, Russia has adopted a more nuanced approach in similar international disputes. But on this occasion, it has explicitly aligned itself with Iran, forging a clear strategic alignment to counter U.S. pressure. Previously, during a visit by the Iranian foreign minister to Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov emphasized that the Russia-Iran Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty will serve to enhance bilateral cooperation across multiple domains. He further stressed Russia's position that any final agreement between the United States and Iran must be strictly confined to the nuclear issue, warning that the introduction of extraneous matters would precipitate a dangerous escalation. This statement unequivocally articulated Russia's stance on the US-Iran conflict and provided crucial diplomatic backing to Iran. As US-Iran tensions have escalated, Russia's support for Iran has intensified. Publicly available information confirms that Russia and Iran maintain robust military cooperation. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022, Iran has provided Russia with drone and ammunition supplies, fostering a mutually beneficial collaborative framework. This strategic partnership has further strengthened the coordination between the two nations in countering U.S. influence. In the wake of the escalation of U.S.-Iran tensions, Russia's rhetoric has become increasingly forthright. On January 13, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova categorically denounced U.S. military threats against Iran as absolutely unacceptable and vehemently condemned external interference in Iran's internal affairs. These actions by Russia send a clear message to the United States that Middle Eastern affairs are not the exclusive domain of U.S. hegemony and that Russia will not acquiesce to Iran's marginalization. This support not only bolsters Iran's confidence but also serves as an effective counterbalance to U.S. unilateralism. This raises the question, why has Russia opted to explicitly align itself with Iran on this occasion? The answer lies in a confluence of strategic and economic interests, which can be analyzed through three key lenses. First, U.S. expansionism in the Middle East has long been a primary concern for Russia. As the epicenter of global energy resources, the Middle East possesses immense geopolitical significance. A U.S. monopoly over Iran would significantly augment U.S. influence in the region, severely compressing Russia's strategic footprint and undermining its global geopolitical aspirations. Consequently, Russia's support for Iran is a strategic imperative to counter U.S. hegemonic expansion and prevent U.S. dominance in the Middle East. Second, both Russia and Iran have been targeted by successive U.S. sanctions, fostering a mutual survival alliance. For decades, the United States has imposed a comprehensive sanctions regime on both nations to hinder their development, severely impeding their economic growth and international cooperation. In this context, strengthening bilateral cooperation and mutual support enables Russia and Iran to mitigate the risk of diplomatic isolation and collectively counter external pressure. Faced with a common adversary, strategic alignment is an essential means of safeguarding their respective national interests. Third, safeguarding energy security and regional stability constitutes a core strategic objective for Russia. Shifts in the Middle Eastern energy balance directly impact Russia's energy export dynamics, and Iran's stability is integral to Russia's energy economy and regional security interests. As a major oil exporter, Iran's energy policies exert a tangible influence on global oil prices. And Russia, also a leading energy exporter, shares common interests with Iran in the global energy market. Furthermore, by supporting Iran, Russia can consolidate its influence in the Middle East and enhance its bargaining power in global geopolitical negotiations. Intelligence agencies have closely monitored Russia-Iran military cooperation, expressing concerns that Russian assistance could significantly enhance Iran's air defense capabilities. The deployment of advanced air defense systems such as the S-400 in Iran would substantially diminish the air superiority of the United States and Israel, underscoring the strategic significance of Russia's support for Iran in counterbalancing U.S. power. Thus, Russia's decision to align with Iran is not impulsive but a calculated strategic maneuver. The critical question now is, the current U.S.-Iran standoff has reached a high-risk juncture, characterized by profound uncertainty. The international community faces a cascade of potential risks, with three primary threats looming large: the risk of military conflict, energy and economic disruptions, and the fragmentation of the international order. First, regarding the risk of military conflict. The U.S. military has intensified its deployments in the Persian Gulf, deploying advanced assets such as littoral combat ships equipped with state-of-the-art mine countermeasure systems and unmanned aerial vehicles specifically tailored to address the challenging navigational conditions of the Strait of Hormuz. However, reports indicate that U.S. Gulf allies, including Saudi Arabia, have expressed opposition to the use of their airspace for potential U.S. military strikes against Iran, citing concerns over their own security. While this has constrained U.S. operational options, it has not eliminated the risk of military confrontation, as the United States may pursue alternative military strategies to achieve its objectives. Turning to Iran's military preparedness, the country has made comprehensive defensive arrangements, with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz designated as a key deterrent measure. As previously noted, Iran maintains a substantial inventory of ballistic missiles, whose range covers U.S. military installations across the Middle East and the entire territory of Israel. Approximately 40,000 to 50,000 U.S. military personnel stationed in Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, and other regional locations fall within the strike range of Iranian missiles, rendering them potential targets. Furthermore, Russian military assistance to Iran, including air defense system components and electronic warfare equipment, has further enhanced Iran's defensive capabilities. Additionally, Russia-Iran satellite data sharing could potentially reduce the effectiveness of U.S. stealth aircraft penetration, further complicating the conflict dynamics. Currently, both sides remain in a state of heightened alert, and a single miscalculation by either party could trigger a direct military confrontation with catastrophic consequences. Given the interconnected nature of the Middle Eastern security landscape, a conflict between the United States and Iran would have far-reaching implications beyond the two belligerents. Second, the potential for energy and economic disruptions is substantial. The navigational security of the Strait of Hormuz is the linchpin of global energy supply stability. A conflict-induced blockade would create a massive gap in global oil supplies, triggering an inevitable surge in oil prices. Andy Lipo, president of Lipo Oil Associates, has warned that a complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz could lead to a sharp increase in oil prices of $10 to $20 per barrel. This price spike would have a profound impact on global business operations, directly driving up production and operational costs for enterprises. In particular, manufacturing and transportation sectors reliant on Middle Eastern energy imports would face crippling cost pressures. Simultaneously, rising oil prices would exacerbate household expenses, including transportation and heating costs, further fueling global inflation and impeding the fragile global economic recovery. Within the shipping industry, freight rates on Middle Eastern routes have already surged by over 30%, with rates on certain key routes exceeding the value of the cargo itself. A further escalation of the conflict could drive shipping costs even higher, exacerbating global supply chain disruptions and undermining the efficiency and stability of international trade. Numerous enterprises dependent on the global supply chain would confront challenges such as raw material shortages and delivery delays, severely hampering global economic growth momentum. In essence, the escalation of the U.S.-Iran conflict represents not merely a bilateral military and political confrontation but a profound test of the resilience of the global economic order. Third, the risk of international order fragmentation is escalating. In response to the current crisis, the United Nations has sought to assume a mediating role. However, as has been the case in previous Middle Eastern disputes, the United States and Israel have frequently clashed with other nations on the issue. Countries such as China and Russia advocate for respect for national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the resolution of disputes through diplomatic negotiations. These divergent perspectives have created a deep divide, making it difficult to forge a unified international response. The U.S. approach of sidelining negotiations in favor of direct coercion has also aroused widespread dissatisfaction among the international community. The resolution of international disputes through diplomatic negotiations constitutes a universally recognized norm of international law. The U.S. practice of capriciously initiating and terminating negotiations and resorting to sanctions as a default policy tool has severely undermined the international order. This has led to the emergence of two distinct blocs within the international community. One that condemns U.S. hegemonism and supports Iran's right to national self-defense, and another that aligns with the United States in criticizing Iran. This polarization has hindered the formation of a consensus and complicated efforts to resolve the crisis. Notably, U.S. unilateralism has prompted its allies to reassess their bilateral relationships with Washington. A Pew Research Center survey reveals that 57% of international respondents no longer view the United States as a model of democracy and perceive a gradual decline in U.S. global influence. This fragmentation of the international order will not only impede the resolution of the U.S.-Iran conflict but also exert a profound and lasting impact on the global governance system, exacerbating geopolitical instability worldwide. Furthermore, domestic political dysfunction in the United States has introduced additional layers of complexity to the crisis. Partisan gridlock, the looming threat of a government shutdown, and the burden of unsustainable debt have hindered the formulation of a coherent and long-term U.S. strategy toward Iran. This policy incoherence has heightened international anxiety for nations across the globe. The escalation of the U.S. We will continue to monitor the latest developments and provide timely analysis. It is imperative that all parties maintain calm and rationality, and resolve their differences through dialogue and consultation rather than resorting to further escalation. Ultimately, peace and stability constitute the fundamental prerequisites for global prosperity and progress.